A gilded private jet, then a simple bus pass. What force could possibly bridge that impossible gap? You are about to enter the secret world of Gilded Age heiresses and fading royalty, where unimaginable fortunes were spent in a desperate pursuit of status. By the end of this story, you will understand the true price of a title and the hidden fragility behind every great fortune. What really happens when a princess is banished from her own kingdom? How does a woman with a $50 million inheritance end up dying nearly penniless? The answers lie in a century of scandal, where personal ambition collided with cold, hard cash. What do you believe is the ultimate cost of a gilded life? The late 19th century forged a new kind of American royalty. This was the Gilded Age, a period of explosive industrial wealth that created dynasties seemingly overnight. Men with names like Vanderbilt, Astor, and Whitney built financial empires so vast they rivaled the treasuries of small nations. Their daughters, raised in marble palaces and educated by private European tutors, became known as the dollar princesses. These young women were groomed from childhood for a singular, glittering purpose. They were to be exported to Europe, their immense fortunes traded for the one thing their new money could not buy at home: an ancient and noble title. They were the original private jet class, possessing a level of material comfort so absolute it was almost incomprehensible. Their world was one of custom-built yachts, private railway cars, and ballrooms constructed for a single evening's entertainment. Yet beneath the surface of this gilded existence lay a profound insecurity. No matter how many millions their fathers possessed, they remained outsiders to the established social hierarchies of New York and Newport. The old guard, with its inherited status, often looked down upon this new industrial wealth. So a grand bargain was struck across the Atlantic. Cash-strapped European aristocrats, lords and dukes whose grand estates were crumbling, saw a lifeline in these American fortunes. In return, the dollar princesses received a title, a castle, and a place in a lineage that stretched back centuries. It was a transaction that seemed to satisfy both parties, a merger of wealth and prestige. But what was the true cost of this exchange for the young woman at its center, shipped across the ocean as a living, breathing dowry? These young women did not simply travel to Europe. They embarked on a high-stakes pilgrimage, armed with steamer trunks of Parisian gowns and letters of introduction. They were known, sometimes mockingly, as the buccaneers, social pirates crossing the Atlantic to capture the ultimate prize, a coronet. Their hunting grounds were the glittering social seasons of London and Paris, a whirl of debutante balls, royal garden parties, and endless dinners, all functioning as a thinly veiled marriage market. For an American mother, securing a titled son-in-law was the final, triumphant proof that her family had truly arrived. It was social validation on a global scale, a way to silence the old money snobs back home with a name that echoed through history. For the daughters, the goal was a title, a tangible symbol of acceptance into a world their money alone could not unlock. But across the negotiating table sat the other party in this grand transaction, the European aristocrat. A duke might own 10,000 acres and a castle filled with old master paintings, but his fortunes were often as crumbling as his estate walls. Centuries of inheritance laws, agricultural depression, and a steadfast refusal to engage in trade had left many noble families land rich and cash poor. The arrival of an American heiress was not just a romantic prospect. It was a financial rescue mission. Her dowry, often in the millions, could repaint the family portrait, restoring roofs, replanting gardens, and funding a lifestyle befitting their station. This was the cold, hard calculus at the heart of the romance. A title was exchanged for a massive infusion of cash, a merger of bloodline and balance sheet. This transactional beginning, this fundamental misunderstanding dressed up as a fairy tale, was the fertile ground where future scandals would inevitably take root. How could a marriage built on such a clear commercial foundation ever hope to find genuine happiness? No figure better embodies this cold transaction than Consuelo Vanderbilt. She was the daughter of one of America's wealthiest men, an heiress to a railroad and shipping fortune so vast it defied comprehension. Her mother, Alva Vanderbilt, was a woman of ferocious social ambition, determined to see her daughter crowned with the highest title possible. For Alva, the ultimate prize was the Duke of Marlborough, a man who possessed one of England's most venerable titles and a legendary estate, Blenheim Palace, which was slowly crumbling from financial neglect. The match was a social cannonball fired across the Atlantic. The Vanderbilt millions would save Blenheim, and the Marlborough title would elevate the Vanderbilts beyond the reach of any American social climber. The wedding itself was a spectacle of staggering opulence, a public display of this new alliance between American industry and European aristocracy. But behind the veil of orange blossoms and the pearl-encrusted gown, Consuelo's heart was breaking. She was deeply in love with another man, an American named Winthrop Rutherford. Her mother, upon discovering the attachment, resorted to extreme measures, allegedly confining Consuelo to their New York mansion and even threatening the life of the man she truly loved. Consuelo walked down the aisle not as a joyful bride, but as a prisoner of her own fortune, weeping silently into her bouquet. She was bartered away, her youth and her heart sacrificed on the altar of social climbing. The gilded cage had its duke, but the bird inside was forever wounded. This was the brutal reality behind the fairy tale, a story not of love, but of a mother's ambition and a daughter's profound loss. What is the value of a palace if it becomes your prison? The price of Consuelo's title was a dowry rumored to be in the millions of dollars, a sum so immense it was less a wedding gift and more a corporate bailout. That Vanderbilt fortune did not just decorate Blenheim Palace, it resurrected it. The Duke used the funds to repair leaking roofs, modernize ancient plumbing, and restore vast tracts of the estate's grounds, effectively funding the preservation of his own heritage with American industrial money. Consuelo now reigned as the Duchess of Marlborough, mistress of a palace more grand than any American mansion, a building so vast it had its own army of servants and its own echo. Yet within those opulent gilded walls, she lived in a state of profound isolation. Her husband, the Duke, was often cold and distant, his primary interest in her seemingly beginning and ending with her bank account. The marriage was a hollow performance, a public display of unity for the few hundred guests who might visit, and a private tragedy for the two people who lived there. The scandal that finally shattered this carefully constructed facade was their legal separation, and later, their divorce. In an era when divorce was a social atom bomb, especially within the aristocratic circles that prized bloodline and appearance above all, it was an act of tremendous courage. For Consuelo, it was the first definitive step away from the gilded cage. It marked the beginning of a long, personal journey from the pinnacle of privileged existence toward a very different kind of life. What does a woman do when she walks away from the palace, but takes nothing with her except her own name? Consuelo Vanderbilt's story is one of quiet suffering, but another American heiress who entered the very same family chose a radically different path. Her name was Jenny Jerome, a vibrant, sharp-witted young woman from Brooklyn. Unlike the carefully controlled Consuelo, Jenny was a force of nature. She captivated Lord Randolph Churchill, the younger son of the very Duke of Marlborough, who would later marry Consuelo during a whirlwind romance. Their marriage was a sensational event, shocking British society not just for its speed, but for the sheer dynamism of the woman at its center. Jenny was not a passive asset to be managed. She was a political partner, a social powerhouse, and an intellectual equal. While her substantial dowry certainly eased the Churchill family's finances, Jenny brought something far more valuable and dangerous to the arrangement: her own formidable ambition. She became the chief architect of her husband's rapid political rise, hosting salons where power brokers gathered, advising on strategy, and even reportedly helping to write his speeches. Her influence was so profound and so public that it became a source of both admiration and gossip. Here was an American woman, born without a title, effectively steering the career of a British aristocrat. This was a scandal of a different sort, not of quiet misery, but of a woman wielding power openly in a world that expected her to be silent and decorative. She proved that a dollar princess could be far more than a checkbook. She could be a kingmaker, and her greatest legacy would not be a restored estate, but a son she raised to lead a nation, Winston Churchill. While the American buccaneers were trading cash for coronets, a different kind of dynasty was perfecting the art of aristocratic alliance in Europe. The Rothschild family did not need to cross an ocean to find their place in high society, because they had built a kingdom of their own, one made of gold and government bonds. Starting as court bankers in Frankfurt's Jewish ghetto, the 5 Rothschild brothers spread across Europe, each establishing a banking house in a major capital. Their power did not come from land or titles, but from an unrivaled network of information and capital that made kings and emperors their clients. They financed wars, stabilized currencies, and managed the personal fortunes of Europe's most powerful rulers. Yet, for all their financial might, they faced entrenched social and religious barriers. The solution was as brilliant as it was systematic. They would marry their way into the very aristocracy that their money supported. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the family's patriarch, had famously instructed his sons to maintain close brotherhood, but his descendants expanded that mandate to include strategic unions with the noble families of Europe. Their immense wealth allowed them to bypass centuries of prejudice, turning social exclusion into an advantage by creating their own exclusive power structure. A Rothschild daughter did not just bring a dowry to a marriage, she brought the influence of an international financial empire. In one telling example, Lionel de Rothschild of the London branch married his own first cousin, Charlotte from the Naples branch, a move that consolidated the family's fortune and kept its power tightly held. But the true masterstroke was marrying into the old nobility. Their children and grandchildren would form alliances with families like the Fitzroys, the Seymours, and even minor German princes. These were not mergers for mere social climbing. They were the deliberate weaving of the Rothschild name into the very fabric of European aristocracy, granting them a level of acceptance and protection that was priceless. The result was the creation of a unique form of financial royalty. A Rothschild baron, a title the family eventually accepted from the Austrian emperor, often held more real power than the duke or count his daughter married. While the nobleman worried about the upkeep of his estate, the Rothschilds were deciding the fate of national economies. They proved that the most durable crown was not made of gold and jewels, but of relentless financial acumen and a web of connections that bound the thrones of Europe to their counting houses. What does it mean when the banker holds more sway than the king he lends to? Lord Randolph Churchill's death left Jenny financially adrift and emotionally unmoored. The brilliant political wife was now a widow, and the substantial fortune she had brought into the marriage had long since been depleted by her husband's own extravagance and illness. But Jenny Jerome was not a woman who would fade quietly into the background. She reinvented herself as a professional beauty, a term used for society women whose photographs were sold and collected by an adoring public. Her face, her style, and her charisma became her currency. Yet this public adoration was shadowed by a relentless series of private scandals. She embarked on a string of affairs with some of the most powerful men in Europe, including a future king of England and a Hungarian count decades her junior. Each relationship was a sensation, whispered about in drawing rooms and splashed across the newspapers, cementing her reputation as a dangerously independent woman. Her personal life was a whirlwind of passion and risk, a stark contrast to the carefully managed existence of her contemporaries. This same recklessness governed her finances. Despite receiving allowances from her family and later from her famous son Winston, money flowed through her fingers like water. She spent lavishly on clothes, on entertaining, on supporting her younger lovers, and on a series of ill-advised business ventures, including a failed attempt to launch a literary magazine. She was a woman perpetually living beyond her means, constantly negotiating debts and borrowing from friends, a startling figure for someone born into such immense wealth. Here was a woman who had helped steer the course of British politics, now often teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Her life reveals a painful truth that a fortune, no matter how large, is no match for a temperament built for spending. The gilded life was not just a status, it was a performance, and Jenna's performance was spectacularly expensive. What happens when the spotlight fades and the bills finally come due? While Jenny Jerome navigated scandal in London, another American heiress was building a kingdom of her own on the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean. Her name was Alice Hine, a widow from New Orleans who possessed a fortune built on banking and a keen, sophisticated intellect. When she married Prince Albert I of Monaco in 1889, she did not arrive as a mere decorative bride. Alice became the first American princess in European history, and she immediately set about transforming her new home. She poured her energy and her wealth into revitalizing Monaco's cultural life, founding the Principality's first public opera house and turning the once sleepy resort into a dazzling destination for artists, musicians, and intellectuals. Under her guidance, Monte Carlo began its ascent into the legendary playground we know today. She was not just a consort, she was a visionary, a driving force who used her position and her American ingenuity to build something lasting. But this story of creation was destined to be shattered by one of personal passion. The very independence and cultural influence that made Alice so remarkable also planted the seeds of her downfall. A closeness formed between the princess and the celebrated composer Isidore de Lara, a man whose operas were the toast of Europe. Their shared love for music blossomed into a deep friendship, and soon the court was buzzing with whispers of a romantic affair. For Prince Albert, a man devoted to oceanography and often absent on long sea voyages, the gossip became an unbearable public humiliation. The scandal reached its climax not in a quiet separation, but in a thunderous political explosion. Enraged, the prince did not merely seek a divorce. He went to the National Council and threatened to dissolve the monarchy of Monaco entirely, to abdicate his throne and revert the principality back to France, all to rid himself of his unfaithful wife. The state itself was held hostage to a broken heart. The result was swift and absolute. Alice Hine was banished. Stripped of her title and her position, she was cast out from the glittering world she had helped create. One day, she was a princess, a cultural luminary at the height of her power and influence. In the next, she was in exile, her name erased from the official records of the principality. Her dramatic fall from grace serves as a stark warning. In this world of gilded alliances, a woman's intellect and ambition could build a kingdom, but a single whisper of scandal could bring it all crashing down. What does it mean to be banished from the very identity you helped to forge? The private dramas of Monaco and London were but a prelude to a far greater cataclysm. While Jenny and Alice navigated the perils of personal scandal, an entire social order in Russia was preparing to meet its end. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 did not just challenge aristocratic privilege, it sought to erase it entirely from the earth. For the American heiresses who had married into the Russian nobility, this was not a matter of social embarrassment or divorce. It was a fight for survival. They had traded their fortunes for titles, only to discover that those titles had become death warrants. The most glittering prize of all was the Russian court, a world of almost mythical opulence. Tsar Nicholas II and his family lived in a bubble of extraordinary wealth, surrounded by grand dukes and princes who owned palaces that dwarfed even the grandest American mansions. American mothers saw this as the ultimate match, a chance to place their daughters at the very apex of European society, just a step away from the throne itself. They sent their girls east with immense dowries, believing they were securing a future of untouchable security and prestige. Mathilda Kashesynska was not an American heiress by birth, but as the prima ballerina of the Imperial Ballet, she became a symbol of this gilded world. She was a mistress to the future Tsar Nicholas II before his marriage, and later to two Grand Dukes, living in a magnificent St. Petersburg mansion gifted to her by the Romanov family. Her life was a whirlwind of diamonds, private performances, and unparalleled influence within the highest circles of the court. She embodied the absolute pinnacle of a woman's success in that era, a star adored by the public and protected by the most powerful men in Russia. Then the revolution came. The opulent world of the Tsars vanished in a storm of violence and ideology. Palaces were stormed, their contents looted or destroyed. Families who had lived in luxury for centuries were executed, imprisoned, or forced to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Mathilda Kasheshenska lost everything in an instant. Her beautiful mansion was seized by the Bolsheviks, her priceless collection of jewels and art confiscated. She escaped St. Petersburg with her life, but little else, fleeing south through a country engulfed in civil war. Her story of survival was a harrowing journey from the very top of the world to the desperate struggle for a crust of bread. This was the ultimate bus pass moment, a fall from grace so complete it was dictated not by personal failure, but by the brutal tide of history. For every American princess who had married a Russian noble, the revolution meant utter devastation. They lost their husbands, their children, their homes, and every single ruble of the fortunes they had brought with them. Those who managed to escape Russia found themselves in Paris or London, penniless refugees in cities where they were once celebrated. The woman who had presided over a staff of hundreds now had to take in sewing. The heiress who once owned a collection of Fabergé eggs was now selling hats in a small shop to make ends meet. The gilded life was not just over, it was annihilated, replaced by a stark reality where the next meal was not guaranteed. Their immense wealth, the very thing that had bought their titles, proved to be the most fragile asset of all. How do you rebuild a life when the entire world that gave it meaning has been swept away? They were the ultimate golden girls, three sisters who seemed to have inherited the entire world. Their mother was the American heiress Grace Hines, a woman of immense wealth. Their father was George Curzon, one of Britain's most powerful statesmen, the Viceroy of India, a man who ruled over 300 million people. The Curzon sisters, Cynthia, Irene, and Alexandra, grew up in a whirl of imperial splendor and limitless privilege. They were beautiful, witty, and connected to the very highest levels of British society, the living embodiment of the successful Anglo-American alliance. Their marriages were events that captivated the nation, each union weaving them deeper into the fabric of the aristocracy. Cynthia married the glamorous and wealthy Oswald Mosley. Irene married a former aide to their father, the handsome and athletic, fruity Metcalfe. Alexandra made what seemed the most brilliant match of all, wedding Edward Ryder, the son and heir of the Earl of Harrowby. For a time, their lives were a perfect tableau of gilded happiness, a seamless continuation of the world their parents had built. But the foundation of that world was not solid rock. It was a vast but finite mountain of cash, and they were living at its peak with no thought for the future. The very glamour that defined them became the engine of their financial ruin. They spent with a breathtaking confidence that assumed the well would never run dry. Lavish parties, endless rounds of couture clothing from Paris, sprawling country house renovations, and the constant upkeep of a social position that demanded visible opulence at every turn. Money was not something to be managed. It was a natural resource like air or sunlight, expected to be always present. The sisters, raised in such grandeur, had never been taught the principles of careful stewardship. Their father, for all his political genius, was notoriously careless with his own finances, and their mother's American fortune was treated as an inexhaustible inheritance, not a trust to be preserved for future generations. They were living on the principal, not the interest, burning through the capital of a fortune that had taken decades to build. The slow erosion was almost invisible at first, masked by the sheer momentum of their social standing. A small estate sold here, a family heirloom quietly auctioned there, to cover a particularly extravagant season in London, but the leaks became a flood. Cynthia's husband, Oswald Mosley, would later squander a tremendous amount of his own family's wealth on his political ambitions, eventually descending into the infamy of fascism. Irene's life was a constant scramble to maintain appearances, her finances a tangled web of debt and dependence. Alexandra, perhaps the most fragile of the three, saw her marriage deteriorate under the strain of financial anxiety. The great fortune that was meant to secure their family's position for 100 years was effectively gone in a single generation. The Curzon sisters did not fall because of a revolution or a single catastrophic scandal. Theirs was a quieter tragedy, the slow, inevitable sinking of a gilded ship that had been taking on water for years. They proved a devastating truth that a legacy of wealth without a legacy of wisdom is simply a countdown to bankruptcy. What good is a famous name when the bank account attached to it is empty? Her story reads like a blueprint for self-destruction. While the Curzon sisters were slowly draining their fortune in London, another woman was setting her inheritance ablaze with spectacular speed in the sweltering heat of colonial Kenya. Lady Edina Sackville was born into the very heart of the British aristocracy, a descendant of the same ancient lineage as the earlier Sackvilles we have met. She inherited not just a famous name, but a substantial fortune, a combination that should have secured her position for life. Instead, she became the notorious queen of the Happy Valley set, a group of wealthy, amoral expatriates living in the Kenyan highlands, where the motto was said to be, "Are you married or you live in Kenya?" Her life became a relentless pursuit of pleasure, a whirlwind of scandal that made the quiet financial decay of the Curzons look tame by comparison. Edina treated marriage not as an institution, but as a temporary arrangement. She cycled through a total of 8 husbands with a dizzying rapidity that shocked even the permissive society around her. Each divorce was more scandalous than the last, often overlapping with the next affair in a blur of infidelity and legal battles. These splits were not clean, they were expensive, requiring lavish payoffs to discarded spouses and constant legal fees that gnawed away at her capital. Her spending was as reckless as her love life. She built a vast, luxurious estate in Happy Valley called Clouds, which became the epicenter of hedonistic parties that stretched for days. The finest French champagne flowed like water, cases of it imported at tremendous cost. Her wardrobe was a rotating collection of the most expensive Parisian fashions, ordered by the dozen and often discarded after a single wearing. She maintained a fleet of cars and a small army of servants to cater to the whims of her ever-changing circle of guests. The money was not merely spent, it was vaporized in the service of a constant, frantic entertainment. This was not the slow erosion of a legacy. It was a bonfire of vanity. Her immense inheritance, which could have sustained a dozen families in comfort, was gone in little more than a decade. The grand estate was lost, the parties ceased, and the lavish dresses were sold off to pay creditors. Lady Edna Sackville died in relative obscurity, her social standing in tatters, and her financial security completely evaporated. She was a stark lesson in the physics of fortune, proving that no amount of inherited wealth can withstand the constant pressure of a personality built for consumption. What remains of a life when the money that fueled its every moment is gone, and all that is left is the echo of yesterday's party? The First World War did not just claim a generation of young men. It shattered the very economic foundations of the old world. For the aristocratic families who had married American heiresses, the conflict was a financial cataclysm. The vast estates that had been their pride and their primary source of income were suddenly a crippling liability. Farmland was churned into mud by trench warfare. Timber forests were clear-cut for the war effort. The legions of servants who had once maintained these grand houses were now in the trenches, or working in munitions factories for better pay. The old agricultural rents, which had funded centuries of aristocratic leisure, dried up almost overnight, but the most devastating blow was yet to come. In the war's grim aftermath, governments were desperate for revenue to rebuild shattered nations and support countless widows and orphans. Their solution was a form of fiscal mass destruction aimed squarely at the landed gentry, a massive increase in death duties, what we now call inheritance tax. Before the war, these taxes were a manageable nuisance. After the war, they became an existential threat. When a lord died, his heirs could now face a tax bill amounting to half the value of the entire estate, a sum that had to be paid in cash, not in land or heirloom. There was only one way to raise that kind of money. They had to sell. Masterpieces by Rembrandt and Titian were pulled from ancestral walls and shipped to American millionaires. Libraries of priceless books, collections of antique silver, entire villages that had been in a family for 500 years, all were auctioned off to strangers to satisfy the taxman's demand. It was a fire sale of history, a systematic dismantling of the world the dollar princesses had paid so much to enter. The grand bargain was broken. The title was still there, but the estate that gave it meaning was gone, sold off acre by acre to pay for a war that changed everything. How do you maintain the lifestyle of a duke when you are living in a single wing of a cavernous palace, with the rest closed off to save on heating bills? This was the great push into the public sphere. The second and third sons, who might have once lived as gentlemen of leisure, now had to find professions. The daughters who were meant to make brilliant marriages had to find work as secretaries or shop girls. The private jet class was officially grounded, their inherited wealth and land-based power rendered obsolete by the brutal new math of the 20th century. The Gilded Age was over, replaced by an age of taxation and toil. Barbara Hutton inherited a world made of diamonds and despair. As the sole grandchild of the five and dime store tycoon Frank Winfield Woolworth, she came of age in the 1920s as one of the wealthiest women on the planet. Her official debut was not merely a party. It was a declaration of American royalty. At the Ritz-Carlton in New York, the ballroom was transformed into a fantasy forest with real trees and mechanical singing birds, a spectacle so lavish it cost more than $50,000, a sum that could have supported an average family for a lifetime. She was showered with $1 million worth of jewels, a literal fortune placed upon her shoulders. The world saw a golden princess, but the reality was far darker. Her mother had died by suicide when Barbara was just a child, a tragedy the newspapers cruelly detailed for the public. Her father was distant and preoccupied with his own life. Barbara grew up isolated in vast, silent mansions, surrounded by servants but utterly alone. Her only constant companion, the knowledge that she was an heiress first and a person second. That immense inheritance was not a foundation for a happy life. It was the very wall that separated her from the possibility of one. She embarked on a series of marriages that read like a catalog of European nobility and glamorous fortune hunters. Her first husband was a Georgian prince, Alexis Mdivani, a man from a family famously known as the marrying Mdivanis for their habit of wedding wealthy heiresses. The marriage was brief and expensive, ending in divorce after he had spent a significant portion of her fortune. Next came Count Kurt von Haugwitz-Riebenthal, a Danish aristocrat who gave Barbara her only son, Lance, but whose primary contribution to her life seemed to be more extravagant spending and deepening misery. There was the film star Cary Grant, a union that captivated the public. Yet even his grounded nature could not penetrate the fortress of her loneliness and growing dependence on pills and alcohol. Then came a trio of princes, from Igor Trubetskoy to Baron Gottfried von Kram, and finally a prince from Laos. Each marriage was shorter than the last, each divorce settlement more staggering. She gifted her husband's fleets of cars, private planes, and palatial homes, treating her fortune as a bottomless well from which to draw affection, only to find it was a sieve. The money did not just attract suitors, it summoned predators. A constant entourage of sycophants, freeloaders, and outright conmen surrounded her, a human moat separating her from genuine connection. They flattered her, isolated her, and systematically looted her wealth. Advisors charged exorbitant fees for non-existent services. Friends convinced her to invest in doomed business ventures. One confidante allegedly persuaded her to hand over a blank signed check, which was then filled out for a king's ransom. Barbara Hutton lived in a gilded vortex where every expression of love or friendship had a price tag, and she was always the one paying. Her personal unhappiness manifested in a crippling addiction to prescription drugs and alcohol, a frail figure wasting away to less than 100 pounds. The poor little rich girl, as the newspapers dubbed her, became a global symbol of a profound truth: that a fortune could buy every material thing in the world except for the one thing that mattered: peace. She died at the age of 66, her $50 million inheritance almost entirely gone, her body found in a Los Angeles hotel room, her only remaining possession of note, a few $1,000s in cash. She had spent a lifetime purchasing princes and palaces, only to die as she had lived, profoundly alone. Barbara Hutton's 7 marriages were not a search for happiness, but a desperate, costly excavation for love. Her first husband, Prince Alexis Mdivani, was a member of that notorious family of professional suitors. The marriage was a whirlwind of extravagant spending, funded entirely by Barbara's fortune. Alexis showered himself with gifts and business investments, draining millions from her inheritance before their swift and public divorce. The pattern was set. Each prince and count who followed came with a price tag. Her marriage to the Danish aristocrat Count Kurt von Haugwitz-Riebenthal was punctuated by the birth of her only son, but also by more staggering expenditures. The Count received a settlement so immense it could have funded a small nation, further hollowing out her financial core. Then came the most famous union, her marriage to the film star Cary Grant. The public saw a fairy tale, the world's most beautiful heiress and its most charming leading man. For a brief period, it seemed she had found something real. Grant did not need her money, and he genuinely tried to help her, to pull her from the deep well of her loneliness and growing addictions. But the fortress of her insecurity was too strong. Even his grounded affection could not compete with the ghosts of her past and the sycophants who constantly surrounded her, whispering in her ear and isolating her from genuine connection. The divorce was another multi-million-dollar event, another chunk of her legacy handed over. With each failed marriage, the financial settlements grew more astronomical. A prince from Russia, a baron from Germany, a prince from Laos. Each departure was marked by a legal document that transferred another fortune into a former husband's bank account. She was not just paying alimony, she was funding their entire futures, buying them estates and businesses while her own foundation crumbled. This was not mere spending. It was a systematic dismantling of a fortune in the vain hope that the next check written would finally purchase the unconditional love she had been denied since childhood. How many castles must you give away before you realize you are the one locked inside? Her final years were a quiet, spectral echo of that Ritz-Carlton debut. The woman who had once owned palaces and yachts was now living in a series of modest hotel suites. Her world shrunk to a few rented rooms. The entourage of admirers and sycophants had long since vanished, their loyalty extinguished along with her ability to write seven-figure checks. Barbara Hutton was profoundly alone, her health shattered by decades of drug and alcohol abuse. A frail figure who weighed less than 100 pounds and was often confined to her bed. The $50 million she had inherited, a sum that once seemed as infinite as the ocean, was now a few shallow puddles. She had spent it all, every last dollar, on princes, on palaces, on a desperate, lifelong search for a love that money could never attract. The final stark visual of her life came in a Los Angeles hotel room on May 11th, 1979. She was found there, having died of a heart attack at the age of 66. The police inventory of her belongings was a heartbreaking ledger of the bus pass reality. Aside from a few pieces of jewelry and a handful of cash totaling a few $1,000s, she had nothing. The heiress to one of America's greatest retail fortunes died with less in her possession than many of the salesgirls who once worked in her grandfather's stores. This was the ultimate destination of the private jet journey, a lonely room where the only thing left to spend was the final moments of a life. Her story stands as one of history's most vivid cautionary tales, a devastating demonstration that a fortune without emotional wisdom or purpose is not a blessing but a weight that can crush a soul. What does it truly profit a person to gain the whole world if they lose themselves in the process? Barbara Hutton's story is one of tragic consumption, but another American heiress born in the same era charted a radically different course. Doris Duke was also christened the richest girl in the world, inheriting a tobacco and hydroelectric fortune that dwarfed even the Woolworth millions. Yet from the very beginning, she seemed determined to be defined by her intellect, not her inheritance. Where Barbara was fragile and sought the spotlight, Doris was fiercely private and possessed a sharp, analytical mind for business. She did not see her wealth as a fund for endless spending, but as a tool for building a meaningful life. She took control of her own financial destiny, personally managing her investments and expanding the fortune her father had left her, becoming a formidable force in finance and agriculture long before it was common for women to do so. Her passions were not fleeting whims, but deep, sustained commitments. She traveled the globe not as a tourist, but as a student, amassing one of the world's most significant collections of Islamic and Southeast Asian art. She poured millions into land conservation, preserving fragile ecosystems and historic gardens with a foresight that was decades ahead of its time. Here, it seemed, was an heiress who had finally mastered the gilded life, using her privilege not for social climbing, but for genuine creation and preservation. But the pressures of such immense wealth and isolation were inescapable. Her personal life became a theater for scandal and profound loneliness. Her first marriage, to a charismatic socialite named James Cromwell, was a media sensation that quickly soured. The relationship was plagued by infidelity and a very public legal battle over a prenuptial agreement, dragging her private affairs into the harsh light of the courtroom. Later in life, she became a virtual recluse in her oceanfront Hawaiian estate, Shangri-La. Her only close companion, a flamboyant and controlling butler named Bernard Lafferty. When she died in 1993, under circumstances some found mysterious, a new storm erupted. Her will ignited a firestorm of litigation, with accusations of manipulation and undue influence surrounding Lafferty, who stood to inherit a massive fortune for his role as executor. The quiet, careful life she had so painstakingly built was ultimately overshadowed by the very public chaos she had always sought to avoid. Doris Duke proved that you could be the shrewdest businesswoman in the world, a savvy custodian of your own fortune, and still find yourself imprisoned by the very wealth you managed so well. What is the true cost of building a fortress to keep the world out, only to find yourself trapped inside with the echoes of your own solitude? While the American heiresses were navigating the perils of fortune, a very English family was courting a far more dangerous kind of scandal. The six Mitford sisters were born into a cash-strapped aristocratic lineage, their world a peculiar blend of ancient titles and threadbare carpets. They did not possess vast American fortunes, but they wielded a different currency altogether, a dazzling, often destructive brand of charisma that propelled them into the very center of the 20th century's most violent political storm. Their family home became a crucible for radical ideas, and each sister seemed to choose a different, extreme path, turning their lives into a public spectacle of ideology and rebellion. The pursuit of status was replaced by the embrace of infamous causes, a choice that would lead not to quiet financial ruin, but to a shattering form of social and personal exile. Diana Mitford was widely considered the family's great beauty, a woman whose intellect and charm captivated London society. Her first marriage to a wealthy brewer was a conventional success, but Diana yearned for a life of consequence, not just comfort. She found her purpose in the rising star of British fascism, Oswald Mosley. After leaving her husband, she became Mosley's mistress and most devoted follower. her salon becoming a gathering place for his supporters. Their wedding in 1936 was a secret, sinister affair, held in the Berlin home of Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, with Adolf Hitler himself as a guest of honor. This was not just a political misstep. It was a profound betrayal of their country and its values. When the Second World War began, the British government imprisoned both Diana and Oswald for the duration of the conflict, seeing them as dangerous security risks. The socialite who had once graced the most exclusive parties now found herself behind barbed wire, her glamour and influence stripped away by the cold reality of her political choices. How far can charm carry you when you have aligned yourself with the enemies of your own nation? Yet Diana's story was almost conventional compared to that of her sister, Unity. A tall, imposing figure with a fervent gaze, Unity developed a schoolgirl crush on Hitler that curdled into a fanatical obsession. She moved to Munich explicitly to be near him, frequenting the restaurants he was known to patronize until she successfully engineered an introduction. Charmed by her aristocratic background and her fervent devotion, Hitler allowed her into his inner circle, a curious English mascot for his regime. She became a fervent Nazi, her identity entirely consumed by her worship of the Führer. When Britain declared war on Germany in 1939, Unity's world collapsed. The two idols of her life were now at war. The conflict was, for her, an unbearable personal schism. In a Munich park, she attempted to take her own life with a pistol gifted to her by Hitler. She survived, but the bullet lodged in her head could not be removed. She was eventually repatriated to England, a broken and ostracized figure, and lived in seclusion until her death a decade later. Her story represents the most extreme version of the Mitford fall from grace, a journey from the heart of English aristocracy to the inner sanctum of the Nazi Party, ending in a tragic, self-inflicted exile. The Mitfords demonstrated that a fall from grace did not require the loss of a fortune. It could be triggered by the loss of one's moral compass, a willing leap into the abyss of political extremism that led to a different kind of poverty, the poverty of honor and belonging. A century after the dollar princesses sailed for Europe, a very different kind of commoner stepped into the ultimate gilded cage. Lady Diana Spencer's wedding to the Prince of Wales in 1981 was a global fairy tale, a spectacle of such grandeur it dwarfed even the grandest Gilded Age ball. She was the quintessential private jet moment, a young woman seemingly transported overnight from a modest London apartment to the heart of a 1,000-year-old monarchy. The world watched, enchanted, as this shy nursery school teacher became the future queen, believing it to be a storybook romance. But the palace walls, much like the opulent halls of Blenheim, concealed a profound and chilling loneliness. The institution that promised to make her a princess systematically stripped away her identity, leaving her isolated, unsupported, and battling a deep sense of betrayal. Her fairy tale, it turned out, was just another transaction where her youth and vitality were the currency exchanged for her title. The gilded cage, now equipped with telephoto lenses and a relentless press corps, was more suffocating than ever. Then came the night of June 29th, 1994. Prince Charles had just given a televised interview admitting to his infidelity. The entire world was watching Diana, expecting a retreat, a display of quiet humiliation befitting a wronged royal wife. What she delivered instead was a thunderclap of silent rebellion. She arrived at a gala at the Serpentine Gallery in a stunning, off-the-shoulder black cocktail dress, a garment that would forever be known as the revenge dress. It was bold, confident, and utterly unapologetic, a stark departure from the demure, royal blue outfits she was supposed to wear. This was not a woman hiding in shame. This was a woman publicly reclaiming her body, her style, and her narrative. That single dress was her declaration of independence, a symbolic shedding of the royal uniform and the constraints it represented. It was the moment the princess decided to stop being a prisoner of the palace and start being the people's princess, a figure of immense global influence operating on her own terms. Her journey away from the crown was a modern echo of Consuelo Vanderbilt's path, a conscious, courageous step from a life of prescribed duty toward one of personal authenticity. She used her newfound freedom to champion causes she genuinely cared for, from AIDS awareness to the international ban on landmines, connecting with the public on a human level the monarchy never could. Her tragic death cemented her status as a global icon of liberation, but it was the revenge dress that first signaled the crack in the gilded facade. It proved that even in the 20th century, the most powerful weapon against a loveless institution was a woman's defiant choice to dress for herself. No title was ever surrendered for a more controversial love. In December of 1936, King Edward VIII of Great Britain made a choice that sent shockwaves through the very foundations of the British Empire. He chose to abdicate his throne, to surrender his birthright as the sovereign of one of the world's most powerful nations, for the woman he loved, the American Wallis Simpson. The scandal was not that she was American, nor that she was a commoner. The true, insurmountable problem was that she was a divorcee, and worse, she was about to become a two-time divorcee. In the eyes of the Church of England, of which the king was the supreme governor, and in the moral code of the establishment, this was an impossible union. The government, the church, and the royal family itself presented Edward with a stark ultimatum: the crown or the woman. His decision, broadcast over the radio to a stunned global audience, was a thunderclap of personal desire over ancient duty. He gave up a 1,000-year-old inheritance for a love that his entire world deemed illegitimate, creating a constitutional crisis that redefined the modern monarchy. In that moment, the most powerful private jet in the world, the British throne, was voluntarily traded for a passport to exile. Their life after the abdication was a study in gilded irrelevance. Granted the titles of Duke and Duchess of Windsor, they became the world's most famous tourists, perpetually circling the globe from one luxurious resort to another, from Paris to New York to the Bahamas. They lived in beautiful homes, hosted chic parties, and were photographed in the finest clothes. But it was all a magnificent facade. The substance of power, purpose, and respect was gone. They were largely shunned by the very aristocracy that had once bowed to him, and the royal family, particularly his successor, King George VI, kept them at a cold, formal distance. They were ghosts at the feast, living reminders of a scandal the institution was desperate to forget. Edward, who had once commanded armies and presided over Parliament, was now reduced to a life of idle luxury, his only duty being to entertain his wife and their small circle of friends. This was not the happy ending of a fairy tale. It was a dramatic step down from the purpose of a throne to the emptiness of a perpetual vacation. The man who had everything gave it all up for love, only to discover that a life without duty can be its own kind of beautifully decorated prison. What is a king without a kingdom, but a man with a very expensive suitcase? The Gilded World did not simply fade away after the war. It was forced to clock in for a 9-to-5 shift. The old certainties of inherited wealth and effortless privilege were gone, replaced by a new and jarring reality for the titled classes. For the first time in centuries, it became not just acceptable, but necessary for aristocrats to seek paid employment. This was the great collective bus pass moment, a seismic shift where lineage alone could no longer pay the heating bills for a drafty castle. Duchesses, once confined to hosting private balls, now walked the public runways as fashion models, their famous names lending a frisson of glamour to post-war couture. Lords who had once managed vast agricultural estates found new careers as journalists, stockbrokers, or advertising executives, trading on their elite educations and social connections in the competitive modern marketplace. Their wives, ladies who had presided over household staffs of dozens, now took secretarial courses and learned to type, their own hands performing the work that had once been delegated to an army of servants. But perhaps the most telling adaptation of all was the transformation of the country house itself. The stately home, long a symbol of private, inherited power, was now opened to the paying public. Earls and countesses became reluctant tour guides, charging visitors a few shillings to gawk at their family portraits and walk through their formal gardens. It was a deeply humbling experience for many, but it was also a stroke of genius. The money raised from ticket sales and the tea room often provided the crucial funds needed to repair a leaking roof or restore a priceless tapestry, preserving the family seat not through rents, but through the curiosity of day trippers. This was the new economic reality, a world where old money had to be supplemented by new hustle. The private jet class had officially been grounded, and every titled person now had to learn the value of a bus pass. What does it mean when your family castle must be saved not by your tenant's rent, but by the price of their admission tickets? Yet even the quiet desperation of a working aristocrat pales against the sheer terror of a family held hostage by its own fortune. In July of 1973, in the bustling Piazza Farnese in Rome, 16-year-old J. Paul Getty III was grabbed off the street by kidnappers. He was the grandson of the richest man in the world, the oil tycoon J. Paul Getty, a man so famously frugal he had a payphone installed in his English country mansion for guests. The captors demanded a ransom of $17 million for the boy's safe return. What followed was a months-long public drama that exposed a chilling family truth, that in some dynasties, the balance sheet can matter more than blood. The initial response from the Getty family, particularly the grandfather, was a resounding refusal. The old man, paranoid about his vast fortune making all his descendants targets, dug in his heels. He publicly declared he would not pay a single dime, arguing that paying any ransom would only put his 14 other grandchildren at risk. The boy's own father, Jay, Paul Getty Jr. was himself struggling with addiction and was financially dependent on his own father, unable to raise the colossal sum. The family was paralyzed by its own wealth, trapped in a negotiation where the price of a life was just another line item. As the weeks stretched into months, the kidnappers grew increasingly frustrated. To prove their seriousness and break the family's stalemate, they committed an act of such barbaric theater it shocked the entire world. They cut off the boy's right ear and mailed it to a daily newspaper in Rome. The accompanying note promised the rest of him would follow in little pieces. The message was now horrifically clear. This was not a bluff. The human cost of fiscal stubbornness was no longer an abstract concept. It was a piece of a young man's body, delivered for public consumption. It was only after this gruesome delivery that the elder Getty finally, reluctantly, agreed to negotiate. Even then, he drove a hard bargain, agreeing to pay only $2.2 million. The maximum amount he claimed was tax deductible. He even loaned the remaining $1 million to his son at 4% interest to be repaid. The boy was eventually released near a truck stop in southern Italy, alive but permanently scarred, both physically and psychologically. The entire ordeal laid bare the ultimate perversion of extreme wealth. The Getty fortune, a monument to one man's ambition, had become a curse that twisted family loyalty into a cold business calculation. The trauma inflicted on that young man was a price no amount of money could ever refund. How much is an ear worth when your family's net worth is in the billions? Those fictional estates of Downton Abbey and the Gilded Age have become our modern window into this vanished world. They wrap the brutal economics of the era in the soft glow of drama, making the desperate bargains of the past feel like elegant entertainment. At the heart of Downton Abbey is the ultimate historical transaction, made flesh and blood. Lady Cora Crawley is not just an American character. She is the American fortune that literally props up the entire English estate. Her substantial dowry, brought from her father's dry goods empire, is the essential life support for the Grantham title and the sprawling abbey itself. This is not a subplot, it is the central premise. The estate is entailed, meaning it can only pass to a male heir, but the money that sustains it came from a woman, creating a constant, quiet tension. The Crawley family must navigate this reality every day, their aristocratic pride perpetually humbled by their dependence on Cora's new money. When a distant male cousin becomes the new heir, the family's terror is not just about lineage, but about whether this stranger will understand the delicate financial symbiosis that keeps the roof over their heads. The drama masterfully illustrates the aristocratic fear that their entire world, built on centuries of tradition, could be undone by a single bank statement. Julian Fellowes, the creator of Downton Abbey, returned to this world with the Gilded Age, but this time he shows us the other side of the Atlantic coin. Here, we witness the raw ambition of the new money families as they slam head first into the immovable wall of old New York society. The Russell family, led by the ruthless railroad tycoon George and his socially determined wife Bertha, are fighting a war on two fronts. They are building an incomprehensibly vast fortune, while simultaneously trying to purchase the social respectability that should, in their minds, come with it. Bertha's relentless campaign to be accepted by the likes of Mrs. Astor is a perfect dramatization of the social climbing that sent so many real-life mothers and daughters sailing to Europe. She builds a palace on Fifth Avenue, throws the most extravagant parties, and wears the most expensive Parisian gowns, yet she is perpetually locked out of the very drawing rooms she seeks to conquer. The show captures the exquisite agony of being fabulously wealthy yet socially invisible, a frustration that made the prospect of a European title so irresistibly appealing. The old guard, represented by the Van Rayen household and their ilk, views the Russells not with curiosity, but with contempt. Their money is too new, too loud, too earned. This is the precise social friction that fueled the transatlantic marriage market. These stories give us a human-scale understanding of the forces we have been exploring. When we watch Bertha Russell's face fall after another social snub, we understand the deep insecurity that festered beneath the gilded surface. When we see Lord Grantham's pained expression as he discusses his estate's finances, we grasp the genuine terror of aristocratic collapse. These fictional narratives make the historical dynamics tangible. They show us that the threat of financial ruin was a constant, haunting presence, a ghost at every lavish ball. The tension was not just between people, but between two competing value systems, blood and money, and the uneasy, often heartbreaking alliances they were forced to make. The drama lies in watching characters navigate a world where a single business reversal or a failed harvest could mean the difference between a palace and a pauper's existence. These television shows remind us that for all the opulence, life at the top was a precarious high-wire act, with a very long and unforgiving drop waiting below. The echoes of those gilded ballrooms are not silent. They resonate today in the lives of their descendants, a generation navigating a world their ancestors could scarcely have imagined. The direct heirs to those colossal fortunes, the great-great-grandchildren of the dollar princesses and the European nobles, have not vanished. Instead, they have undergone a profound transformation, trading the gilded cage for the corner office. You will now find their names not only in the social registers, but on the letterheads of hedge funds, private equity firms, and venture capital companies. They have taken the dynastic instinct for preservation and redirected it from land to liquid assets, becoming the modern architects of wealth management. This is the new aristocracy, one defined not by the acreage of its estates, but by the agility of its investment portfolios. The lesson of the 20th century was seared into their family lore. A fortune is not a monument to be admired, but a living entity that must be fed and grown. What does old money look like when it has learned to wear a suit and work a 12-hour day? For some, the legacy manifests in the world of art and philanthropy. They serve as trustees for the museums their families once filled with treasures, or they run foundations established with the very fortunes that were once nearly spent into oblivion. This is a socially acceptable and often critically important form of work for the modern heir. It allows them to wield influence and maintain a presence in high society, but with a purpose that extends beyond mere leisure. They are the custodians of a cultural and philanthropic legacy, using the wealth of the past to shape the future. Yet for every prominent descendant, there are dozens who have simply faded into the comfortable, quiet folds of the upper middle class. Their trust funds, while substantial, have been divided and subdivided over generations. They might be lawyers, doctors, or consultants, living in nice suburbs, their famous surnames now just a curious piece of family trivia. The obscurity is often a choice, a deliberate step away from the glare of a name that once commanded headlines. They are the ones who ultimately cashed in the private jet for the bus pass and found a peculiar kind of freedom in the transaction. The very concept of old money has been forced to evolve. It is no longer just about a title or a vast estate, though those still exist. Today, old money is a mindset of stewardship, a deep-seated understanding that the true measure of a dynasty is not its peak wealth, but its longevity. The ghosts of Barbara Hutton and Lady Edina Sackville serve as permanent cautionary tales, their stories told and retold as object lessons in the dangers of profligacy. The modern wealthy family is often a tightly run ship, with strict financial education for its young and a focus on instilling a sense of purpose, not just privilege. The great unresolved tension of the gilded life remains. How do you prepare an heir for a world of work when they will never need a paycheck? The answer, for those who succeed, is to make the work itself the new form of status. The ambition is no longer to marry a duke, but to build a billion-dollar fund. The validation is no longer a curtsy from a countess, but a seat on the board of a major cultural institution. The private jet might still be in the family, but it is now a tool for business, not just pleasure. The journey from gilded excess to pragmatic adaptation is the ultimate survival story, proving that the most valuable inheritance is not the fortune itself, but the wisdom to know that it must be earned anew by every generation. From gilded ballrooms to quiet suburban homes, from private yachts to public buses, the journey of these fortunes reveals a profound and recurring truth. A mountain of gold cannot buy a moment of genuine peace, and a title etched in history is no shield against a lonely heart. We witnessed fortunes evaporate not through one dramatic explosion, but through the slow drip of relentless spending, as with the Curzon sisters, or in the spectacular bonfire of vanity that was Lady Edina Sackville. We saw how personal scandal could topple a princess, as it did for Alice of Monaco, and how the cold tides of war and revolution could sweep away entire dynasties, leaving the Russian heiresses with nothing. The story of Barbara Hutton stands as the ultimate testament to the emptiness of wealth without love. A $50 million inheritance spent on a desperate, fruitless search for connection. These lives were buffeted by forces far beyond their control, from world wars and inheritance taxes to shifting social norms that rendered their gilded world obsolete. The private jet was always eventually traded for a bus pass. The true value of wealth, then, lies not in what it can purchase, but in what it can build, a life of purpose, connection, and emotional resilience that no market crash can ever devalue. As you reflect on these epic tales of rise and fall, we would love to know which journey you found most compelling. Was it the tragic loneliness of Barbara Hutton, the quiet suffering of Consuelo Vanderbilt, or the shocking political falls of the Mitford sisters? Share your thoughts in the comments below.